Thirst. Thirst. There are few words in the English language which so adequately describe human longing. Thirst. We need water every 3 days or we die. In hot temperatures, it could happen a lot quicker. What is the most powerful memory that you have to define the word thirst? For me, I'm taken to El Salvador, Central America, 1994. A newspaper article I found online reads, I'll read it to you. The 14th of May is a day everyone in Chalatenango, El Salvador looks forward to and dreads at the same time. The anticipation is for the commemoration of the anniversary of the Sumpul River Massacre, in which hundreds of people make the trek to the site of the brutal 1980 attack on over 600 civilians. The trepidation is precisely because of the hike itself, which is straight down, what can at some points be compared to a dusty cliff, and then straight back up again in the scorching midday sun. However, as arduous as the climb is, it doesn't stop community members, survivors and family members of victims from coming out in mass for the event. The commemoration remembers the over 600 civilians, including children, the elderly, the pregnant, who were murdered by Salvadoran and Honduran military forces in a military operation that was part of the Scorched Earth strategy of 1980. Today, Las Aradas, the site of the massacre, is a cornfield with a few trees and a small monument to the victims. In 1994, Leanne and I were in El Salvador and we were taken to this site, the Sumpul River Massacre. We were a group of 7. It took about 3 hours to wind our way down the mountain at night, going through disused army trenches that had been there for about 20 years of war. As the newspaper article said, it was basically straight down. We slept there overnight and we had one small bottle of water, and the next day I was really quite concerned that we were going to have fresh water. In fact, we were glad that they were boiling water from the river. We saw the massacre site and they were boiling water, and we thought, at least they're going to have fresh water here. And then Leanne reminded me the other day, a little kid came along and put like a crab or something in the water. And we went, oh, okay, so we're not going to be taking that. We had less than a little bottle of water to get back up, so it took us 6 hours to hike our way back up the mountain. You can only imagine. We were nearly passing out. And we made it to the top. And without doubt, Leanne, I would say it's probably the scariest thing we've ever done, trying to get to the top of this mountain. When I think of thirst, that's the story which comes to mind. But as I reflect on that experience, I can start to make sense of why the people that took us to the bottom of that mountain wanted to make sure that we didn't come up in the cool of the morning. We came up in the scorching heat of the midday sun without much water. They were trying to teach us about thirst. And not just that our bodies need water. In this remote corner of El Salvador, between USA in the north and South America in the south, innocent people on the border of Honduras had been rounded up and murdered by Honduran police and military on one side and the El Salvadoran on the other. This was the site of the worst bloodshed in Latin American history. These poor peasants, after 20 years of war, were thirsty. The people of El Salvador are still thirsty. I'd say the people of Indonesia, after what happened yesterday, are thirsty for peace. The people of Syria, the people of Palestine. The list goes on, doesn't it? People are thirsty for justice. They're thirsty for dignity. They're thirsty for their stories to be heard. They're thirsty for love, for family, for time to fulfill their dreams. They have a thirst for significance, a thirst for grace. They have a thirst for God, for eternity, and they're no different to any of us. We thirst. We thirst for God, and we find a thirsty woman in John chapter 4. It's an incredible account of God in human flesh and a so seemingly a forgotten woman who no one values, but God does. First of all, we see in this woman a thirst for love. A thirst for love. Jesus has chosen not to bypass Samaria on his way north to Galilee. He has stopped at a famous drinking hole known as Jacob's Well. It's noon, and for some reason, he sends all of his disciples off to get the food, which is a bit odd, isn't it? I mean, it's like, all 12 of you go and hold each other's hands. What are they going to do? I don't know, go and kill the animal or fish for it, or maybe they are. I don't know actually where you go and find lunch in the first century. But all 12 have been sent off for some reason, and there he is, by himself, ready to give a certain person his undivided attention. And as he sits there, a Samaritan woman walks up to him, and shockingly, Jesus speaks to her. And the woman responds with exactly what you would expect her to say. She says, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Now, unless you know some history, it doesn't make any sense to us either. So let me give you some of the history. John chapter 4 is set in Samaria, Galilee in the north, Judea in the south. Samaria is right there in the middle. It's been a hot spot of racial tension for over 700 years. The Samaritans were a mixed breed of people. They were despised. They were disdained and hated by their neighbours. And this is some of the reason why. In 722 BC, the Assyrians came in from the north and invaded the north of the Holy Land and took off the people of Israel into captivity, at least the top 10 tribes. And as is so often the case, when an invading army takes control, they took many of the conquered people, the Jews, into exile, removing them from their families, their occupations, their history, their neighbourhood, their community, their religion. Took them off into a foreign place, which is really northern Iraq today. But also typically, with a conquering nation, many were left behind. In fact, the Assyrians left people from a broad range of nationalities in this space in the north of Israel to take over the livelihoods that were left, to take over the land and the houses and the occupations, to live off someone else's work. The aim? To cause the conquered people to lose their heritage, their religion and their faith. So you have two groups of people. One group of Jews who are taking off into exile, and they have the challenge before them, under persecution and slavery, will they keep their faith? You have another group of Jews who get to stay in the land, and they have the same challenge, mixed with other religions. Will they keep their faith? Will they stay with their convictions? Will they syncretize their religion? 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 24 tells us the story. Almost immediately, the Jews that stayed in Samaria started blending their religion, started worshipping other gods, even to the point of actually taking on child sacrifice. So you can imagine how angry this would make the Israelites who were taken off into captivity. They didn't get to stay there, but the ones who did get to stay there basically abandoned their faith. We're told in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah that the people of God, 200 years after that exile, they decide to, in Jerusalem, rebuild the temple that had been destroyed. So they begin construction of the temple in the early 500s BC, and the Samaritans, they say, well, why don't we come down and help out? So the Samaritans come back down to Jerusalem and say, well, now that we're going to build the temple, we're going to give you a hand. And the Jews haven't forgotten their betrayal. The Jews are like, no way. You have no place with us. We reject you completely. So, of course, the Samaritans don't feel great about this. The next thing, there's a renegade Jew who marries a Samaritan woman, and they start this whole group who say, we don't need Jerusalem. We don't need the temple there, we can make our own. So they go up the top of Mount Gerizim in Samaria and they build their own temple, basically start their own religion. They have their own God, they have their own temple, their own priesthood, their own sacrificial system. Many hundreds of years go by, 120 years before Christ, the Jews get so sick to death of what the Samaritans are doing with their false temple, they declare war, march on Sychar, go up to Mount Gerizim and destroy the temple. 120 years on from that day, God turns up in human flesh, Jesus, grabs some disciples and one day finds himself about lunchtime in the very place that all the action has taken place, Jacob's well in Samaria. And so these people, the Jews and the Samaritans, they still hate each other. The barrier is racial, it's cultural, it's religious. Most Jews of this day wouldn't even travel through these parts. They would add 2 or 3 days to the journey. But Jesus doesn't, because Jesus has a date with someone's destiny. Jesus is going to this spot for a reason. The destiny of a woman who didn't expect to find anyone at noon at the well. Now, you may know this about the story. When would people of the day normally go to the well? They go in the cool of the morning or the cool of the evening. Now, this woman is going at midday. Most people would read into the story and expect that she's going at midday because she is an outcast. She doesn't belong. Most of it's a pretty sort of sexist society, as we would see now. Most of the women are doing all the work around the life of the Samaritans, and they would go, and it would be a time to catch up on some community. It'd be a good thing to do the walk to the well, spend time together, just catch up on life. Not for this woman. Currently, I wonder, do you know in your life what it's like to not be in on the circle? Do you know what it's like to be like this woman? She wasn't in the circle. There's a circle of people who enjoy community and relationship and they go to the well together, but not this woman. This woman knows what it's like to be rejected, to be inferior. And those of us who have known that maybe could tell a story that it's been like that for much of our lives. And you wonder how you can come to a new group of people and still feel like you don't belong. Like, how many groups of people do I have to go through before I find somewhere that I belong? I won't ask you to raise your hand. But I'm seeing faces that are telling me I think I know what that's like. In fact, I'm sure many of us sitting here today who come from a different culture know exactly what that's like. Because you've made that massive step to come to a different culture where you're not the same as everyone else. As I read this passage, it just strikes me, my jaw drops. You think how despised you have to be a Samaritan. But imagine you're the outcast of the Samaritans. It doesn't feel good to be this woman. I mean, everyone hates the Samaritans and the Samaritans hate me. A brother in Christ once told me, I feel like an island, and I know I'm hard to get on with, but I can't help it. I feel like I'm an island that is surrounded by a jagged reef, and no one can get near me, and I'm lonely. I'm lonely on this island. In fact, I'm dying here by myself. I'm dying here. No one can get to me, and I can't get out. And this woman says, how can you ask me for a drink? This woman has a thirst for love. But I want to encourage you, if you're thirsty for love this morning, I want you to notice the proximity of Jesus to the one who thirsts for love. He's already at the well. He knows she's coming. He is waiting at the well. And I wonder what that means for you and I. When we wonder, does Jesus know about what I'm going through? That they don't want me in their circle. But Jesus did want her in his circle. And he actually wants you and I in his circle. It is normal to crave, to thirst for love. And I would suggest to you this morning that your thirst and my thirst has been designed into us by God himself. Amen? That's a good thing. I'm not going to read it out now, but Psalm 13 is a great passage to read if you're feeling in that place. Verse 3 says, "Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die." Anyone need a sparkle back in their eyes? I thought, wow, it spoke to me at different times. Lord, I can't see much of a sparkle in the mirror. Can you return to me a sparkle in my eye? Verse 10 to 14, we see the human thirst for time. Jesus says, if you knew the gift of God, you would ask, what's the gift of God? What reminds me of John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave. He gave this gift, and what was the gift? His Son, and ultimately eternal life. Time. It's at least endless time that God gives through Jesus. Verse 14 says, everyone who receives God's gift of living water will live forever. As human beings, we long for time. And the way I know that is if we had a Holy Grail up here. There's a couple. Holy Grail's here. Anyone want to come and have a drink? Most of us wouldn't think about the fact that who wants to live forever in this world? Not me. No, go away. I want to go to heaven and live forever. I want to come back to the new earth and live forever. But you know what? I bet you half of us would come and have a sip. Don't you reckon? The Holy Grail, if it existed, because we want time. We want time so we can see dreams to come to fruition, or maybe we're just afraid of death. We think, wow, if I had enough time. Jesus tells the woman that he can give her running water, not stagnant, living water, which will give her endless time. And she says exactly what we would say. Where do you get the water from? Where do you get the water from? Because she wants it. She wants time, like us. You know, Jesus gives us time. Every now and then I stop and I tell myself, I'm going to live forever and ever and ever. Oh, the problem I'm thinking is really bad right now. It's probably not so bad in the light of ever and ever and ever. Amen? If you have come under the grace of Jesus by his blood through faith, you're going to live forever. Let that put your current problem today into perspective. We long for time, and Jesus gives time. We thirst for it. We thirst for value. This is seen in verse 15 to 18. The woman initially is purely thinking about the immediate. Where's this water? I want to have a drink. I want to be cool. I want to have a cool drink. She's craving the qualities of living water. She's saying, I want to be valuable enough to be satisfied. I want to assert my value. Give me a drink. And then Jesus drops this prophetic word of knowledge. In essence, he says, my dear woman, your value has copped a flogging in this life, hasn't it? You've had 5 husbands, and if that wasn't bad enough in your culture, the guy that you're with now doesn't even value you enough to marry you. I know you're looking for value. Value in so many ways is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? The question of the market stall is always, what's it worth to you? So what do you see when you look in the mirror every day? What value do you put on that person? When you know the backstory, you know what a failure that person is. Some of you may have uber self-esteem and you don't know what I'm talking about. But others of us look in the mirror and we know what that person's done. And we struggle a bit with our own value. I can guarantee this woman at the well is struggling with her own sense of value, with her own human dignity. We thirst for value, and we live in a world that values humans very differently depending on where you live in the world. Amen? Somehow we just think a bunch of humans are there, they're not worth as much as a bunch of humans over there. But I don't believe the Bible tells us that God believes the same thing. He's valuing every human being. And this is an incredible insight into the mind of God about what he values. This woman has no value. But Jesus is hanging around to talk to her. I wonder if this morning you feel like your value has copped a flogging as well. People don't talk to you when you speak. I was talking to a woman once at a church who had had a very stellar career. And she lost her job. She got to the end of her 50s. And she said, "Jono, I can tell you now that a woman in her late 50s is invisible in the workplace. And it doesn't feel good." I'm not a woman and I'm not in my mid-50s. But I heard what she said. She said, "I don't like it. I've got a lot to offer. But the world wants to send a message to me and say, you don't have much value anymore." I don't know what place you're at in your life this morning or what factors have come around you looking in the mirror and giving what you see a number of worth. But this story tells us about a God who values us. Romans 3:23 is a tragic, yet somehow validating verse. It says, "We all have fallen short of the glory of God." We are existing in a fallen condition. But our value is eternally found in Romans 5:8. God demonstrated his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Our value is forever held in that place. This woman is a sinner like us. But again, check out the proximity of God in human flesh. He's gone out of his way to find her. And he's come a long way. He's come a long way to find her at that well. Physically, that close. Think about how we can just take for granted the fact that God is in human flesh next to a woman who's despised by everybody. But he's that close. How did he get to be that close? What did he have to go through to get to be that close? Philippians 2 tells us. He had to say goodbye to that place of safety and eternal spirit with the Father. He didn't stop being God, but he had to actually become a fetus in a virgin's womb, a teenager, a poor teenager. He had to actually grow up as a toddler. What? Probably worse than that, he had to be an adolescent again. Not that he'd ever be an adolescent, but who wants to go through that ugly stage? Gangly, puberty. Cheerfully we say, no. But that's what he's done to get there. He's 30 years old. He's a human being with all the messiness of humanity. And that just screams out to me that he values her. Amen? But that's what he's done for us. Or has the evil one so entrapped you and I in our mind that we go, oh, that's a woman in the Bible, but that's not me. When I look in the mirror, I don't even see the value of a Samaritan woman. Come on, you've got to be kidding. You and I have immense eternal value. It's been shown to us by what Jesus has done for us. And he comes and he speaks to this woman. And he points her to the truth. Verse 19 and 24. She has a thirst for grace. Let me read to you verse 19. "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet. You're speaking stuff that no one else knows into my life. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." Sometime later on, they're going to worship you in a school in Hornsby. You can. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. And from one angle it looks, if you read this text, it looks like she's just sort of changing the subject of her own sin, because she's just been caught. She's got some problems. And it looks like she's bringing up the old Jewish-Samaritan disagreements. But if you really look at the text, she's actually saying, okay, I've been caught out. My life's a mess. Where can I go and worship? But what does she want to do when she goes to worship? She's going to go and offer sacrifice. She's been caught out. She's like, I know I'm a sinner. Where can I go? Show me. Where do I go to offer some sort of sacrifice? Because I need God. I need grace. I want to be free. I want to be clean. I want to start again. Jesus gives a hint towards something that she could never understand. But it's got to do with grace and truth and spirit. Salvation is from the Jews, but not only for the Jews. She thinks it's just for the Jews. Salvation is from the Jews, but not just for them, it's for her also. It's for Samaritans. It's for the outcast, despised, sinful, rejected Samaritan woman. She's seeking after grace, and Jesus says, the Father's looking for people who will worship in spirit and in truth. John 1:14 says that Jesus is full of grace and truth. And in verse 33 of chapter 1, it says that Jesus is the one who baptizes with the Spirit. So how do you reckon you get, if you're a woman at the well, how do you get to worship God the way He wants us to worship, in spirit and in truth? You come through the one who is full of grace and truth, who baptizes with the Spirit, Jesus. You come through Jesus, and in a very short period of time after this interaction, Jesus will be led to a cross as the perfect lamb, and He will offer His perfect blood. And His blood will be spilt for this Samaritan woman and for every other human being who would receive His gift, and He'll rise again. And through His resurrection, He's going to offer grace and forgiveness to all who thirst for it. And those who receive this grace will worship God in spirit and in truth. And finally, she has a thirst for God. She does have a thirst for God. She's just caught up in something bigger than her, this Samaritan Jewish hatred. She's got a thirst for God. I remember Brett Davis, founder of Christian Surfers, once said in an interview with Lee Hatcher on Open House, he said he'd never met an atheist out in the surf. It's an interesting comment. You meet atheists in lots of other places, but they don't go surfing. They believe in some sort of creator because it's just too awesome. Ecclesiastes says that eternity is in our hearts. In other words, as it's been said, there's a God-shaped hole in our hearts that only He can fill. We thirst for God. It's hard to articulate it sometimes, but we thirst for God. Over the years, I've seen so many people who, after a church service, it hasn't happened here so much, to be honest, but so many people will say, I can't stop crying. I'm at church and I just can't stop crying. Why is that happening? I think it's because they're coming to a safe place where God is present. And they're connecting with God in their heart without knowing how to articulate it, just saying, I feel like I'm home. And maybe you feel like that today. I've come home. I'm restless. I'm looking for God. I'm looking for that which will satisfy me forever. The Samaritan woman is waiting for the intimate expression of her God in what was known as Messiah. This is what she says in verse 25. The woman said, I know that Messiah called Christ is coming. When He comes, He will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I who speak to you am He. You know, this is the most crazy thing that happens here. If you look through the Bible, He doesn't, in John's Gospel, Jesus doesn't tell anyone else that He's Messiah. Isn't that crazy? Now, what is that? God is so different to us. How on earth is it that God would think a sinful, despised outcast is important enough
to hang out, wait for her, tell her intimate knowledge of her life, and then say, hey, by the way, I'm Messiah. It's our secret. What does it say about the upside down kingdom and what God thinks about people? I'd say he values and loves people in ways that we can barely understand. He's beyond us. He's different to us. He doesn't miss anybody. Some of us feel like we're outside the circle and always have been, and we are unimportant, and God thinks the same thing because, well, life's always said it. My parents said it. My husband, my wife has said it. My kids say it. It's not true. Our value is found in what God thinks about us. Jesus says, I am He. I am God. I'm Messiah. I'm the one you're searching for. I'm right here with you. So, I wonder, do you thirst for God? Do you thirst for God? And I would encourage you with He is thirsting for you. And it's such a tough thing in life to get rid of the stuff that gets in our head and clutters up our world, and even staying awake long enough in this sermon to get to the good part. It seems to me to be the hardest part in all the world for some of us here. Anyway, it's your problem. You've got to deal with it. You've got to work out how to stay awake for the good stuff. Because you'll miss it in life. Because God wants to meet us. How do we hear the thirst that God has for us in our lives? Well, I think we just open up our heart and we seek Him. We open up His Word and we say, God, I'm thirsty. I'm thirsty. Do you thirst for love, time, value, grace, God? Well, this communion table, I wonder if the stewards could come out and take the cover off for us.